And if you'd like to learn more about this, our lecture on the Weather Underground really shows what terror manifests itself as, and also, to a certain extent, its futility. So Lenin viewed the task of true revolutionaries to not engage in violent acts on the hope for some spontaneous awakening in the people. Instead, he viewed the task of the revolutionaries to build the organization that could create revolutionary class consciousness in the workers. So how do you do this? Well, Lenin argued for revolutionary theory, professional revolutionaries, and strong party discipline. In opposition to the trade unionist tendency, Lenin argued that workers should confront political problems above and beyond narrow economic interests. So Lenin's focus on theory stood in contradistinction to the economist's theory, or mode of action, right? The economists thought that workers would spontaneously gain class consciousness, right, their recognition of their position as a class under capitalism, or they would gain revolutionary consciousness, right, the idea of how to overthrow capitalism and how to organize. However, Lenin argued for the incredibly crazy and controversial position that the predominant ideology in bourgeois society is bourgeois ideology. And of course, most new left thinkers believe that the workers will just spontaneously organize and come up with a revolutionary ideology. So if you find it commonsensical that under a capitalist system, most people will have a capitalist ideology, then you probably agree with Lenin in this case. So he argued that revolutionary theory itself comes from rigorous theoretical work done on our society and the various relationships in our society. The most advanced theoretical thinkers then need to confront, expose, and teach these advanced theories to the workers so that the workers can better understand their position under capitalism. It's quite easy for bourgeois ideology or capitalist ideology, or the owner's ideology, right, the dominant elite ideology, to explain to workers why they should form a union. And the simple reason is this. If you believe in capitalist ideology, it makes a lot of sense to form a union because then you can sell the products of your labor, right, your hour or your salary of your life for a better price, right? So you can justify joining a union for just personal gain, right? However, it's much more theoretically difficult and much more theoretically advanced to explain how the workers' union, factory, and particular capitalist owners fit into the entire capitalist system of oppression and exploitation, right? So one only needs to explain to you you'll make more money if you join a union. One explains to you that the goal of the union is to struggle to end capitalist exploitation as such, which requires a great deal more theoretical work. So Lenin said, without revolutionary theory, there can be no revolutionary movement. He thought, often Lenin is accused of elitism. However, he thought that workers could and wanted to learn the most advanced concepts, but the professional revolutionaries would consist of those, workers, student, intellectual, what have you, who remained the most theoretically advanced. And these advanced workers were termed by Lenin the revolutionary vanguard. So these theoretically advanced workers and students who form the vanguard would need to organize themselves into a revolutionary party. So this brings us to our next concept. And the revolutionary party would organize and centralize vital functions of the struggle, from coordinating worker strikes to putting out a newspaper. This vanguard party would coordinate these central efforts. Moreover, these actions would require people to dedicate themselves full-time to this task. Right? As Lenin says, right, if a worker is good at organizing a factory, what they should be doing is not working 16 hours a day, but organizing factories. So these essentially would become professional revolutionaries that the workers could look to for leadership and organization. And of course, the most advanced workers would ultimately join these professional revolutionaries through the support of the party. So that worker who organized their factory by themselves would be recruited from the party, and the party would provide some subsistence means, a small apartment or a collectively owned house, food, shelter, clothing, and then it would be the task of this worker to then engage in full-time revolution, thus transferring from a factory worker into a professional revolutionary, right, part of the revolutionary vanguard. So, in this organization itself, Lenin viewed democracy of this organization as a functional one. Rather than working on the impractical principles of necessarily complete open publication for all actions and the elections of all members, which Lenin called toy democracy, Lenin argued for individuals to form their own revolutionary connections and hold party discipline as a matter of course to those who seemed most able. So, however, as a matter of course, all of these revolutionaries would need to exercise the strictest discipline in regard to their fellow revolutionaries. And he says this about that. They have not the time to think about toy forms of democratism within a close and compact body of comrades, in which complete and mutual confidence prevails, but they have a lively sense of their responsibility, knowing as they do from experience that an organization of real revolutionaries will stop at nothing to rid itself of unworthy members. Moreover, there is a fairly well-developed public opinion in Russia and the international revolutionary circles, which has a long history behind it, and which sternly and ruthlessly punishes every departure from the duties of comradeship, and quote-unquote democratism, real and not toy democratism, certainly forms a component part of this conception of comradeship. Take all this into consideration and you will realize that this talk and those resolutions about quote-unquote anti-democratic tendencies, and again, this is, as John mentioned, those people who are criticizing Lenin for not being open and democratic enough, they have the musty odor of the playing at generals, which is indulged abroad. So essentially these people want to play at being the general of the revolutionary, rather than engaging in the real revolutionary task at hand. Or alternatively, they want to play at general instead of doing what is to be done. So, through these actions, Lenin and a relatively small party of Bolsheviks were able to secure the victory, again, over the Western powers, the white counter-revolutionaries, and other ineffectual or counter-revolutionary groups, like the social revolutionaries, like the anarchists, like the Makhnovists. So, once this disciplined revolutionary party has seized the state, right, has led a successful revolution, this leads us, quite naturally, to Lenin's conception of the state. So, Lenin states clearly that every state, including the most democratic republic, is nothing but a machine for the suppression of one class by another class. So, under feudalism, the state is used by the aristocracy to suppress the other classes. And under capitalism, it is the bourgeois or capitalists or owners who use the state to suppress the other classes. And under communism and socialism, the state is used, depending on how exactly you want to frame those terms, the state is used to suppress the bourgeois class, right, the capitalists. And of course, Lenin puts this into practice. So Lenin used methods as wide as expropriating the capitalist property, that means seizing and taking capitalist property, right, through land reform, as John mentioned earlier, and making it property of the state, to only allowing workers and peasants to vote in key elections, right? This is what's meant by all power to the Soviets. Those are factory and soldier councils. And there were no capitalists that were allowed to be part of the Soviets. So when you say all power to the Soviets, you are de facto removing the capitalist right to vote. And so he did this. Now, of course, Lenin believed, as I stated earlier, that capitalist ideology was the dominant ideology under capitalism, but he did not believe that this capitalist ideology could hold sway forever. So, over time, the state would gradually wither, since it was no longer needed to suppress the other classes, most notably the capitalists, and since no other classes would exist but the proletariat, the workers, right, it would begin to disappear. Thus, the very use of the state would end in the abolition of the state. For Lenin, this formed the essence of the dictatorship of the proletariat. And of course, if you're interested in the dictatorship of the proletariat, we also have a lecture on that you can find on our YouTube.